All right, so we heard 3 stories, and as it says over there, there's a PhD at the bottom. My work was not in body image. It was about obesity and weight management from a political decision-making point of view, which just meant that I read an awful lot of books and papers and experiential stuff and research on issues related to body image. It's about 15-20 minutes of condensed material which is relevant to what we have been discussing. But to start with, since the event is called TheMirror, I should tell you couple of my friends are here who've been to my house and might remember I have a 9-foot tall gilded mirror in the entrance hallway of my house. I inherited it with a grade 2 listed building I used to live in. And when we did the exercise that Hannah asked us to do, I actually wrote, I wish I really looked in the mirror more frequently, because I have literally reduced that mirror to its functional use of reflecting light and making the entrance hallway more bright. I actually pass it maybe 15 times a day. I never look in it because it's just there. And that is my relationship with the mirror, which is quite different from all the relationships with the mirror that we have heard about. So, I wish I looked like Cindy Crawford. There'll be no prizes on offer for guessing that these are the words of none other than Cindy Crawford. How did we arrive at this point? How did we create a world where Cindy Crawford doesn't believe she looks like Cindy Crawford? Because there is a lot of activity that goes in making her look like what we think she looks like. In other words, how did we go from here? This is Venus of Willendorf from about 25 to 28,000 years ago to here. This is an autumn 2015, I think, campaign of Stuart Weitzman, the shoemaker. They are wearing shoes if you look very closely. But essentially, their bodies on display. We don't have time to go over 25,000 years, but we can look at the last 7 decades. And why the last 7 decades? Pretty much end of Second World War is when the Western world started forming its identity as it exists today. So, over the last 7 decades, we got from that to that via certain things. One of them was this. These are some images we all recognize. We have Twiggy in the left corner, 1960s icon made by Vogue magazine, no less. There's an ad for Virginia Slims because apparently fat cigarettes are for men and slim cigarettes are for women. By the way, don't look like a pear because that shape is not for a girl. If your breasts don't look like that, no one is going to give you time of day. At the top, there is an ad from India for a product called Fair and Lovely. It's made by Unilever, which sells the product on the basis of the prejudice against dark-skinned girls. All the advertising is focused on how a dark-skinned girl doesn't get into the university she wants, doesn't get the boyfriend she wants, doesn't get the job she wants. 15 days of Fair and Lovely and her life changes. At the bottom corner left are all the 90s supermodels. There's a Revlon ad on it. There's another shoe ad. That couple, interestingly, was very athletic. They still are. He is a big-time marathon runner. And she lost her Miss Universe crown for giving an answer that if she won the crown, she's going to use all the money and her newfound exposure to build sports facilities for girls in India. That's an ad for shoes. Advertising is a multi-billion-dollar industry whose reason for existence is to tell us about all our real and imagined imperfections and then sell us products to fix those imperfections. It doesn't just affect women, it affects men too. A friend of mine said to me one day, "You need to talk to my husband." I said, "Okay, why?" Well, we were watching Pride and Prejudice last night, which is a film made by the woman who made Bend It Like Beckham. And my husband thinks Aishwarya Rai is fat. Aishwarya Rai is often seen on Cannes red carpet and is often feted as one of the most beautiful women alive on this planet. If some of you do not know who that woman is, I'll show you a picture. This woman, apparently, according to my friend's husband, is fat. He doesn't realize that's surrounded by women of different body shapes, as many as we can see in this room and more, he's completely sold on the idea that that's not the ideal body image. This woman is not good enough for him. Back to advertising. When it comes to advertisements, everybody says, "Ooh, I block out ads. They don't mean anything to me." And research that has been done shows that people will say this while wearing a Gap t-shirt or a pair of Nike trainers or glasses that are from Gucci on a license manufactured by an Italian maker, all that kind of stuff. Forget everybody else. When I see an advertisement for ice cream, I want ice cream. I am extremely susceptible to ice cream advertising. And normally I say I'm more lazy than I'm greedy, which is true. But occasionally I will look at the time and say 15 minutes, the corner shop is still open, put on shoes and go and get ice cream. We are all affected by advertising. And if advertising is not sufficient, we have experts with quote marks around their description who tell us Japanese women don't get fat and old, French women don't get fat. They also tell us, oh, by the way, if you are fat, there is a whole host of diets that you can go on. You can look at the blood type diet, you can do a diet which will make you sexy, you can go on the Atkins diet. By the way, the guy died of cardiovascular disease, you should know. There's a wheat belly diet, there's a DASH diet, there's a flat belly diet, you name it, and we have a book to pander to that insecurity. And if all that isn't sufficient, we go shopping, influenced by some of this advertising and some of our own desires. This is a New York Times research from 2011. What it essentially shows is that if you buy a dress from Chico's in size 8, the waist size is 31 inches. You buy the same dress from, I think, Yves Saint Laurent or Shanghai Tang, it's catering to a 26-inch waist. What do you think it does to us? Due to resizing, and this is called vanity sizing, due to resizing, between 2005 and 2011, I went from wearing a US size 4 petite to wearing a US size 2P, 0P and 00P. But when I fit in the 4P and the 00P, what do you think is my conversation in my head? I tell myself, I must have gained weight. Mind you, I'm wearing the 4P and the 00P on the same trip to California, so it's not like I'm changing weight on an hourly basis. But this is what numbers do to us. They tell us, they give us a way to measure ourselves against something and then doubt ourselves, doubt our own bodies, doubt what we see in the mirror. You see why I have reduced the mirror to a functional use in the entrance hallway of my house? So how does seeing all this make you feel? Do you feel a little bit like a mug? Do you feel like someone who's not bringing a critical lens, as in critical thinking, not as in criticism, to your own reflection when you criticize it in front of a mirror? And mind you, this is just our external world, because what lies behind us and what lies ahead of us are tiny matters compared to what lies inside us, within us. And what is your inner voice saying, and do you know why? So it starts really early. I have another friend whose daughter was 3, came back from prep school saying, "Mommy, my thighs are fat." Mind you, this friend is 5 foot 8 inches tall, whippet thin. She was a full-time mom of 2 kids. She definitely wasn't discussing her thighs with her children. So the child picked it up from someone in the school who had been hearing this criticism of thighs. It doesn't end there. Girls as young as 7-year-old in France and in Sweden and in Japan have been found to consider themselves fat. They want to go on diets because around them there is all this talk about diets, about being thinner, about losing weight. By the time puberty hits, nearly 70% of the girls have tried one diet or another. They also show up in research as women who, or young women or teenagers, who spectacularly hate their thighs and hips, which are in formation, by the way, as puberty takes them to adulthood, but they hate it. Adulthood is no better. 8 out of 10 women overestimate their size when they look in the mirror. So this inner voice is with us all the time, and it is not saying very nice stuff to us. So when you look at the mirror, if you were to take an anthropological lens to it, you have to ask, Are you looking at a mirror, or are you looking at a dirty lens? That lens that has smudges all over it of other people's prejudices, of messages from advertising, things your mom said, things your aunt said, things your granny said, the neighbor's mom said, somebody passed a comment, somebody whistled, somebody looked at you when you ordered an ice cream for yourself when you weren't quite fitting in the thin seat in the restaurant. So what happens with all this onslaught? This is what happens. Anorexia, which is believed to be a young girl's disease, is no longer confined just to them. Anorexia is in middle-aged women, it's in older women. In the population, there is obesity and eating disorder paradox. In fact, in America, there are more people suffering eating disorders than are morbidly obese. But pretty much all conversation is about morbid obesity, not about anorexia. In Japan, there is an anorexia epidemic, which apparently they are ignoring. And next time somebody tells you French women don't get fat, remember that poster. That's a French public service advertisement. Plainly says obesity kills. Look closely, it's made grotesque. Probably that's why French women don't get fat. And of course, study reveals shocking results. I don't know who they are shocking to, about women's self-confidence and acceptance. And then we have smart people making this commentary. Joan Bakewell wrote an article earlier this year saying, you think girls in Syrian camps and refugee camps have anorexia? No, this is just what urban girls do. And I'm very happy for Hadley Freeman to have challenged her and said, get a clue, because Joan Bakewell is uninformed. There's an American researcher called Joan Jacobs Brimberg who did a longitudinal project called the Bodies Project, and she has researched anorexia. And what she found is that way back, as far back as the 13th and 14th century, there was an appearance of a phenomenon called anorexia mirabilis, the miraculous loss of appetite that girls were suddenly finding themselves in the midst of, surviving on sips of water, a piece of the Eucharist, all kinds of things. But as time passed, people thought that this was girls being wicked and controlling. And by the 1870s, there was medicalization, and that is when we came across anorexia nervosa as a really well-defined disorder. But what Joan Jacobs Brimberg also says is that when there is a disorder in the body politic, the surroundings of us, there's a disorder with our body image and body acceptance. A very interesting illustration for that opinion is also corroborated by historian Peter Stearns, who notes that in the 1960s in America, women were already being affected by images such as Twiggies being published in media owned by white men. And he was talking about white women affected by media owned by white men. He also writes that African American women were too consumed by the civil rights movement to bother about getting affected by that media. Think about it for a second. If we have a cause bigger than us, do we stop fixating with the size of our own bottoms? It's worth thinking about. You don't have to start that analysis right away. But then, how do we explain growing obesity if these are the influences on us and we are always trying to lose weight and try and become thinner and so on? There was a parliamentary inquiry here in 2005 where this question was asked. And while no conclusion was reached, it was generally accepted that when we are bombarded with images that are unreal, that we do not see ourselves accomplishing, we just give up. We say, forget it, I'll just eat cake. So in other words, the famous status message, it's complicated. So now what? We are here. Where do we go from here? And what is the way out of this? I will make no prescriptions, but I will share 3 things that are found to be useful in research. The first one is becoming aware of our implicit biases. The second is observing how we talk to ourselves. And third is understanding and practicing good self-care. You will see that these messages have come back to you repeatedly through the evening. What are implicit biases? Those are the heuristics we draw upon pretty quickly without thinking consciously when we judge something. When we see an overweight girl order a cake, we are all guilty of raising an eyebrow. when we see somebody who's taking more space than we think they should, we are all judging them. We judge ourselves. When we are unable to close the zip on our jeans, we are thinking, damn, I shouldn't have eaten that extra whatever I ate last week. Those biases that talk to us, that make these quick decisions for us, we must recognize them first. And how do we talk to ourselves? So research shows that patients self-report how their self-talk changes their self-confidence. But there's not yet a lot of neuroscience evidence to show. So there is a gap in research there. But there's interesting observational studies on anorexic women who are really thin, but when you give them a reasonable size door to go through, they go through it as if it's taking them a lot of space to go through it. They have a complete disconnect between how they are and how they think they are. So there is a complete mind-boggling thing going on with their physical perception of themselves, which is why they keep correcting it by eating less and less, correcting in their world. And to that extent, researchers believe that if we change our self-talk, we could neurologically remodel our perceptions of our bodies. But research also shows that words matter. So saying, I am all that, may not be as effective as saying Shefaly is all that, or Hannah is all that, or Paola is all that. So you are slightly disembodying your own self with the person that other people see. We have talked about that as well earlier in the evening, that how others see us is what matters. And mostly when we think we are too thin, too fat, we are thinking about how others see us. They might think I'm too thin, or I'm too fat. The most important thing that recurred today is self-care. One of my friend's moms said to her, when my children are ill, I must really eat properly. And the friend recently brought it up on her mother's birthday and wrote it on a Facebook wall. And I said, you know, your mom has said this to me as well. So the idea is, if you don't look after yourself, how are you going to conquer the world that you set out to conquer? But how do we learn self-care? We mostly learn by observing. When we are kids, my mother died when I was 4. So I have not grown up seeing a woman who's putting lipstick in front of the mirror. So I don't use lipstick. I have no sense of makeup. I have worked in a makeup company, no relationship with makeup whatsoever. But we learn through watching. We know that when we are ill, I hear these stories from my friends. Oh, I was ill and my mother was crying by my bedside. I don't remember my mother crying or my dad crying by my bedside. So how do we learn self-care? We learn through other people modeling the behavior to us. But what happens if nobody has modeled that to you? If the main female influence that you saw was a self-flagellating martyr, how do you move away from it? How do you learn? So I have an interesting book recommendation for you. It's available for advance order. It's a friend of mine, Tracy Cleantis, who's written this book called An Invitation to Self-Care. Her own story is quite affecting. This is her second book. And I am quite privy to watching the book take shape, which is why I'm happy to recommend it. She spent over $100,000 getting fertility treatment, trying to get pregnant and have a baby. Then one day the penny dropped. Wasn't going to happen. So she decided, okay, what now? How do I change my life next? This has broken my biggest ambition, biggest dream. So she reinvented herself. And her first book was called The Next Happy. She had a contrarian message. Please quit while you're ahead, while you have still in it, still in you to do something new with your life, something creative, something wonderful. And in the process of writing that book, she came across a whole bunch of martyrs or wannabe martyrs who were her friends, who were doing all kinds of stuff which was anything but self-care, which motivated her to write this second book. And this book contains a whole lot of tips on how to ensure your physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual well-being on a day-to-day basis. So I'll give you a couple of my secrets. You know, in winters, people give up getting pedicure. I never do that. My nails painted are for me. And they are painted all through the year. I have perfected a 20-minute chocolate cake recipe. If at 10:30 a.m. on Sunday I want cake, by 11 o'clock I have cake. But that doesn't mean that I have cake every Sunday. But by giving myself cake every now and then, I keep that desire that arises from too much self-negation at bay. There are loads of things I do. I wake up at 4 o'clock. I like waking up at 4 o'clock, which means right now I should be in bed. But I wake up at 4 o'clock because from 4 o'clock to about 8 o'clock, there's complete silence. I do whatever the hell I want. Because after that, if the day demands of me that I must go and help somebody, do this meeting, the meeting runs over, the trains are full, I'm serene. Nothing affects me because I have taken care of what I wanted to do first thing in the morning. So find that for yourself. What is it that you like to do for your own physical well-being, emotional well-being, psychological well-being, indeed spiritual well-being, and go to it. I would recommend the book actually. I have seen bits of it. I'm trying to wangle an advanced copy. It's not working so far, but it's a great thing to have something like this in one place. And to leave you with a thought, we'll finish with a poem by Spike Milligan. Spike Milligan wrote this. Mirror, mirror. A young spring tender girl combed her joyous hair. You are very ugly, said the mirror. But on her lips hung a smile of dove's secret loveliness. For only that morning had not the blind boy said, you are beautiful? Thank you.